A very good evening, aspirants. Welcome to the Hindu News Analysis brought to you by Shankar Academy for the date 3rd of February 2022. So these are the articles I have taken today for discussion. Now in these two articles, I'll be discussing about World Wetlands Day and we'll be also seeing about waterbirds and Asian waterbird census. And then in this next discussion, we'll be discussing about India-Britain international relations. And then here we'll be discussing about input tax credit, and this is a discussion on capital expenditure. This is about fiscal deficit, and finally we'll be finishing our news article discussion with the discussion about aluminium sector. And today I have two prelims practice questions. I do have one quiz question also. So pay attention to the discussions today so that you can easily attend the quiz question. Without wasting much time, let us get to the news article discussion. So today we are going to start our discussion based on this picture called as bird watch. This picture shows us the flamingos that are flocking a wetland in Mumbai. Now this picture is given because yesterday was World Wetlands Day. So let us see what is this World Wetlands Day, and we'll also understand the meaning of wetlands in this discussion. See, each year on 2nd February, World Wetlands Day is celebrated. It is celebrated to raise global awareness about the vital role of wetlands for people and for our planet. And this particular day actually marks the date of adoption of the Convention on Wetlands. This Convention on Wetlands was adopted on 2nd February 1971. It was adopted in the Iranian city of Ramsar. And that is why this Convention on Wetlands is also known as the Ramsar Convention. So, the day when Ramsar Convention was adopted is celebrated as the World Wetlands Day. Now, this year has a theme. The theme is Wetlands Action for People and Nature. Now, this theme highlights the importance of actions that are needed to ensure the conservation and sustainable use of wetlands for humans and for planetary health. So, this was about the World Wetlands Day. Now, what do we mean by wetlands? So, these are the areas where water is the primary factor that is controlling the environment and the associated plant and animal life. These wetlands occur where the water table is at or near the surface of the land, or where the land is covered by water. Therefore, according to the definition of Ramsar Convention itself, wetlands are areas of marsh, fen, peatland or waters. Now these areas could be artificial or natural, they could be permanent or temporary, or they could have a static water or flowing water, or they could even have fresh water, brackish water or salt water. So in total these areas are called as wetlands. Now the areas of marine water where the depth at the low tide does not exceed 6 meters is also a wetland under the Ramsar Convention. So therefore it also includes floodplains, rivers and lakes, and coastal areas such as salt marshes, mangroves, intertidal mudflats and seagrass beds. It includes coral reefs and human-made wetlands such as dams, reservoirs, rice paddy fields and wastewater treatment ponds and lagoons. So remember, all these come under the definition of wetlands according to the Ramsar Convention. But here you should remember that this definition of wetlands is slightly varying according to Indian legislation. Here I am talking about the Wetlands Conservation and Management Rules of 2017. Under this, wetlands does not include river channels, paddy fields, human-made water bodies or tanks which are specifically constructed for drinking water purposes, and the structures that are specifically constructed for aquaculture, salt production, recreation and irrigation purposes. So all these do not come under the definition of wetlands according to Wetlands Conservation and Management Rules of 2017. But they are included as wetlands under the Ramsar Convention. Remember this difference. So this is what I wanted to discuss in this discussion. I wanted you to know that there are two definitions of wetlands. One is in the Ramsar Convention and another one is in the Wetlands Conservation and Management Rules, which is a legislation in India. So with this, let us get to the next discussion. Now this discussion is also a topic in biodiversity. It talks about the Asian waterbird census of 2022. Actually, this discussion is related to our first discussion. We'll see how. Now before seeing the findings of the census, let us see what this census is and what do we mean by a waterbird. See, a waterbird is a bird that frequents water. that is which visits water frequently, and especially this bird habitually wades or swims in fresh water. Now they usually spend all of their life or even part of their life in wetlands because these wetlands provide habitat and food sources for them to survive. So the waterbirds use many kinds of wetlands. They use swamps, lagoons, mudflats, estuaries, bays and even open beaches. They even use freshwater and saltwater lakes, rivers, floodplain wetlands and dams. So this is how the waterbirds and wetlands are related. And note that these waterbirds are indicators of wetland health. Particularly, the population trends of these waterbirds over time are indicative of biodiversity trends and ecosystem health in the wetlands. Now, these waterbirds include waterfowls such as ducks, geese, swans. It includes pelicans, ibises and spoonbills, egrets and herons. It includes water hens, terns and gulls, and even shorebirds, which are also called as waders. So, these all come under the definition of waterbirds. So as I already said, to know the health of wetlands, waterbirds population is important, and that is why waterbird census is conducted. That is, the status of population of waterbirds over time is calculated in these censuses, and one such important census of waterbirds is the Asian Waterbird Census. See, actually this census is a part of Global International Waterbird Census, that is IWC. See, IWC is a global waterbird monitoring program. It supports the conservation and management of wetlands and waterbirds worldwide. And this Asian Waterbird Census runs in parallel with other regional programs in the IWC, which are conducted in Africa, Europe, West Asia, etc. Now coming back to Asian Waterbird Census, it was initiated in 1987 in the Indian subcontinent, and since then it has grown rapidly to cover major regions of Asia from Afghanistan eastwards to Japan, Southeast Asia and Australasia. So remember, the Asian Waterbird Census covers from Afghanistan to Japan to Southeast Asia and Australasia. Therefore, this census covers the entire East Asian Australasian flyway and a larger part of Central Asian flyway also. So what is a flyway? So it is the route that is followed by a migratory bird on their journeys between their breeding places and wintering places. Here you can see the flyways around the world, and this is the East Asian Australasian flyway, and this is where the Central Asian flyway is. So this Asian Waterbird Census covers these two. Now these are the objectives of this census. You can just go through it. Now note that this census takes place every January, and it is a citizen science event. That is, here volunteers, they count the waterbirds by visiting the wetlands. Now the major benefit of such a census is that its result is used to identify wetlands of high importance for waterbirds, and based on that they can take conservation measures, such as they can designate that particular wetland as a Ramsar site, or they can designate it as a flyway network site, or they can even be included as priority wetlands within the national programs. So this is the importance of conducting a waterbird census. Now actually the Asian Waterbird Census 2022 report is not out yet, but today we are going to see some findings based on the news article. Now this particular article reports about the census data with reference to Kerala. Now according to the data, there is a drop in the number of waterbirds and the species of waterbirds that are observed in Trivandrum itself. The data suggests that there is almost 30% reduction. Now this trend is reflected in all the 11 wetlands in the district that were considered under the census. See, totally all the teams counted 3077 birds belonging to 56 species, but last year they were able to count 4372 birds belonging to 74 species. So this year there is a drop in the number of waterbirds and the species of waterbirds. Now this reduction is mainly due to the quality of wetlands. According to the article, these wetlands face threats due to anthropogenic activities. Now what are these important activities? It includes solid waste dumping, then shifting from paddy cultivation to vegetable cultivation, and applying of chemicals is also a threat to the wetlands. Then noise from crackers used by the farmers and nearby temples are also a threat to the wetlands and also to the waterbirds. And then the disturbances caused by photographers and videographers for wedding and other photo shoots are also disturbing the ecology of wetlands. So these are leading to the drop in the number of waterbirds. Now based on this data, the state government of Kerala can take appropriate measures so as to increase the number of waterbirds in the state. So that is all. In this discussion, we saw about what do you mean by waterbirds, and then we saw Asian Waterbird Census, we saw why a waterbird census is important and how it is related to wetland. With these points in mind, now let us get to the next discussion. Now, our next discussion is going to be based on this editorial article. It talks about an important area in India's international relations. Yes, it talks about India-United Kingdom partnership. Particularly, this topic is important because recently the Prime Ministers of India and United Kingdom have shared a vision of transformative decade in the India-UK partnership. And as part of this transformation, the two leaders even declared their ambition of doubling the bilateral trade between the countries by the year 2030. So, on those lines, they even directed their governments to take steps to reduce barriers in trade. And as part of reducing this barrier, they directed their governments to complete the groundwork on a free trade agreement by the end of 2021. But due to the pandemic, this was delayed, and now only the steps are being taken to complete the free trade agreement between India and United Kingdom. In this context, it is important for us to understand the India-UK trade relations and cultural relations, and we'll also see the significance of the free trade agreement for both the countries. First, let us discuss some of the important facts about India-UK relations. So, India and UK are bound by strong ties of history and cultures in several centuries. We know that because India was a British colony. And after India gained independence, the relationship of India with UK strengthened when their partnership was upgraded to a strategic partnership in the year 2004. See, a strategic partnership means a long-term interaction between two countries based on political, economic, social and historical factors. Additionally, our economic relations are also notable. For example, the merchandise trade between the two countries was around $15.45 billion in 2019 to 20. And note that the trade balance was in favor of India. So, India had a trade surplus with United Kingdom, which means India exports more to UK than what it imports from it. Now, here you can see in this representation that India's exports are more than its imports, and India's trade surplus from 2014 to 15 period. Apart from this, India has invested in 120 projects and even created nearly 5,500 new jobs in the United Kingdom. In this way, India became the second largest source of foreign direct investment in UK. Here, the first one is USA. Now, similarly, there are also nearly 600 UK companies in India. They employ more than 320,000 people. Such companies include Barclays, which has its biggest office outside of London in Pune. And as you know, Hindustan Lever is also a UK-based company, but it is headquartered in Mumbai, and it also supports our Prime Minister's vision for an Atmanirbhar Bharat. So in this regard, United Kingdom is the sixth largest investor in India. It comes after Singapore, Mauritius, Netherlands, Japan and USA. And even UK accounts for around 6% of all foreign direct investments into India. Now, in terms of education, research and innovation also, UK is among the favoured nations for Indian students to pursue their higher education. Actually, India was one of the biggest beneficiaries of UK's new liberalised point-based immigration system. And currently, if you note, around 50,000 Indian students are studying in United Kingdom. Now, in addition to these, India and UK also closely engage on climate-related issues through various mechanisms, such as they are engaged in ministerial energy dialogue and joint working groups on climate, power and renewables. Then we also know that India-UK Green Growth Equity Fund is mobilizing institutional investments in the renewable energy, waste management, electric mobility and environment subsectors in India. Plus, United Kingdom has remained a supportive partner of India in the international arena also. For example, UK has been supportive of India's permanent membership of UNSC since 2004. And UK is also a strong supporter of India's membership of Nuclear Suppliers Group, Missiles Technology Control Regime, Australia Group and Wassenaar Arrangement. Apart from all these, UK is also a member of International Solar Alliance, to which India was a founding member. And if we talk about Indian diaspora in UK, we know that Indian diaspora is one of the largest ethnic minority communities in United Kingdom. Approximately there are 1.6 million British nationals of Indian origin, and there are more than 351,000 NRIs living in UK. So therefore, this equates to almost 2.5% of UK's population, and together they contribute to 6% of United Kingdom's GDP. And also remember that currently there are 16 Indian origin members of parliament in United Kingdom's parliament. And out of these 16 members, 5 even hold key ministerial positions in UK government. So due to these economic and cultural partnerships and the political engagement, both countries are now trying to chart a free trade agreement. So first let us see what is a free trade agreement. So it is the agreement between two or more countries, or it is the agreement between two or more trading blocs, and they primarily agree to reduce or eliminate the customs tariffs and non-tariff barriers on trade between them. Here, tariff barriers means the tax or duty which is imposed on the goods. These are the goods that are traded to and from abroad. On the other hand, a non-tariff barrier is a way to restrict trade, but using trade barriers in a form other than the tariff. So this includes quotas, embargoes, sanctions and levies. All these come under non-tariff barriers. So the FTAs are a means to reduce and eliminate customs tariff and non-tariff barriers. In addition to this, the FTAs normally cover trade in goods such as agricultural or industrial products. It also covers trade in services such as banking, construction, etc. And FTA also covers other areas such as intellectual property rights, investment, government procurement, and competition policy. But remember, FTAs are not limited to reducing and eliminating tariffs. They also help to address various issues behind the borders such as intellectual property issues, e-commerce issues, and government procurement. So in this regard only, a trade deal helps them to diversify the supply chain because it makes it easier and cheaper for more businesses to do business across borders. Plus, the low barriers will incentivize new and small medium-sized enterprises to export their goods and services. So overall, a free trade agreement also means that Indian and British consumers will see improvements in the variety of products and the affordability of products. Now, due to all these advantages only, both the Indian side and the UK side are keen on framing the free trade agreement, and they have already taken certain steps. For example, UK already approved the export of British apples to India, and on the other hand, it even enabled a greater number of Indian fisheries to export shrimp to the United Kingdom. See, these might be small, but they are meaningful steps, and these demonstrate that both the countries are keen on taking concrete measures to stimulate growth. So that is why both the countries share an ambition to finish negotiations on a comprehensive and balanced free trade agreement by the end of 2022. See, this is going to be a big task because all trade negotiations are a little complex, and even the size and stage of development of India and UK are different. But still, the opportunities which the FTA presents to both the countries are quite bigger. For example, if you take UK, we know that United Kingdom develops on free trade. So if you remember, United Kingdom was a part of European Union and it left European Union after 47 years in 2020. So now UK is keen on building a network of like-minded democracies like India, which is committed to free trade. Now, on the other hand, if we take India, India also has an extraordinary opportunity to transform its economy and society in the next 30 years. And we know that Indo-Pacific region is home to half of world's people and it produces around 50% of global economic growth. And India is a country at the heart of Indo-Pacific region. So in this regard, free trade agreement with United Kingdom will help India to have a greater access to the highly open and competitive market. It will also offer valuable opportunities for India's booming companies. For example, Bengaluru's startup companies can have a direct access to London's capital markets to raise funds. So in this regard, the trade agreement between United Kingdom and India will stimulate growth and employment in both countries. Already, an analysis by United Kingdom's government has shown that such an FTA would add around £14.8 billion to the GDP of India and UK collectively. This will be added by 2035 itself. So that is why this trade agreement is important for UK as well. And finally, as a conclusion, we can say that an FTA will mark a new way of working between United Kingdom and India. It gives a new framework within which the two countries can grow and flourish together. So it will be a high time for both the countries to finish the FTA and reap its benefits. These are some of the important points that you have to take note from this editorial article discussion. In this discussion, we saw about India-UK relations. We particularly saw about the trade relations and Indian diaspora's contribution to UK's GDP. Then we saw about FTA, what do we mean by it? Then we saw how advantageous it will be for India and UK together. So with these points in mind, now let us get to the next discussion. So this discussion is going to be based on this news article which talks about input tax credit. See, in the finance bill, which is one of the budget documents, some amendments to GST law were proposed. Now these amendments seeks to restrict the input tax credit option. That is why this is in news. So today let us understand what is it, and then we will see the amendments. See, input tax credit or ITC is one of the key features of goods and services tax, that is GST. Now this mechanism aims on avoiding cascading of taxes. See, cascading of taxes means tax on tax. Consider that you are a manufacturer and you are paying a tax on output of a product. Now when we have input credit, you can reduce the tax which you have already paid on buying some inputs. And after reducing this amount, you can pay the remaining tax amount. This is called as input tax credit. Let us take an example to simply understand this. Imagine that you are a manufacturer of a cotton shirt. Now assume that the tax payable on output, that is your shirt, is rupees 450. Now for making this shirt, you have bought cotton threads, buttons, etc. Now while buying these inputs, you have paid a tax of rupees 300 rupees. So this will be your input tax, that is 300 will be your input tax. Now under the GST regime, you can now claim input credit of rupees 300 and you only need to deposit remaining 150 rupees in taxes. That is 400 minus 300 will be 150. This is the amount you have to finally pay. Previously, what used to happen was you will be paying 450 rupees and previously you would have paid 300 rupees while buying inputs. So totally your input tax would have amounted to 750 rupees. But now this avoids the tax on tax, and here we are reducing the 300 rupees which we have already paid as input tax. Now who can avail this input tax credit? So this mechanism is available to those who are covered under the GST Act. This means manufacturers, suppliers, agents, e-commerce operators, aggregators, etc. They can avail ITC. But there are certain exemptions for availing ITC. For example, it cannot be claimed for personal use or for goods that are exempted. Further, a business which is under the composition scheme cannot avail input tax credit. See, in composition scheme, small taxpayers can get rid of long GST formalities and they can pay GST at a fixed rate of turnover. And this scheme can be opted by any taxpayer whose turnover is less than rupees 1.5 crores. So those who are covered under this scheme, they cannot avail input tax credit. So now what is the news today? As I already said, it is with reference to the issue with the new finance bill. The finance bill proposed some changes in the Central GST Act sections that were relating to input tax credit. These proposed changes aim to restrict input tax credit for manufacturers unless their suppliers have remitted their share of taxes. This means if there is any failure to accurately report input tax credit, then it could lead to demand notices from tax authorities. But the issue here is that many manufacturing firms may not be in a position to ensure whether their suppliers have paid tax on time or not. So this again puts added pressure on businesses to accurately report the ITC each month. So that is all. In this discussion, we saw about input tax credit. We saw who can avail it and who is exempted from it. And then finally, we saw what were the changes introduced in the new finance bill. Now let us get to the next discussion. Now, our next discussion is going to be based on this news article. This article mentions about the capital expenditure announced by the government in the union budget. See, this year's budget has earmarked more money for capital expenditure than what was expected. This was announced as a measure to accelerate growth. And that is why it is said as higher than expected CAPEX. Here CAPEX means capital expenditure. So today we are going to see what is CAPEX and the advantages of higher capital expenditure. See, first, as you know, expenditure is the amount of money that is spent on something. So when it comes to union budget, expenditure of the government can be classified into two types. The first one is revenue expenditure and the second one is capital expenditure. Now here, the expenditure which are incurred to meet the day-to-day and regular needs of the government, and the expenditure that will not yield any revenue in the future, all these are termed as revenue expenditure. The best example for revenue expenditure is the expense on defense, expense on pensions and salaries. As you know, they will not directly yield any revenue. On the other hand, when the money is spent towards building the country, then it is called as capital expenditure. Now, mostly such expenditures are incurred on long period development programs. So here, the capital expenditure is a two-way transaction. So the amount received needs to be paid again to the payee. That means whatever amount spent by the government, it will come back to the government as a profit. And the most important point to note here is the capital expenditure leads to asset creation, because these are the expenditures incurred on long period development programs. So in short, we can say that government capital expenditure is the disbursement of government funds in the form of investments or in the form of development spending towards the production of long-term assets. If you take examples for this, we can take the money that is spent on railways or for the construction of national highways and roads, etc. So in this regard, note that for the current fiscal year, Centre has budgeted capital expenditure of 5.54 lakh crore rupees. And this is 26% higher than the revised estimate of financial year 2021. Now, how advantageous is this higher capital expenditure? See, just now I said that through capital expenditure, fixed assets are acquired. On the other hand, even the existing assets are upgraded or even loans are repaid. So this in turn creates employment and it puts money on the hands of the people. So that is why higher capital expenditure enhances labor participation in the economy. Now this in turn helps to generate demand in the economy, and when there is high demand, we know that it will attract private investments. And since the capital expenditure is on fixed assets, that is for a longer period of time, here the private investments could also be for a longer term, and this will help in sustaining the economic growth. So overall, by creating long-term assets, the economy is benefited because it can help generate revenues for many years. Now all this is happening due to what we call as multiplier effect. So this is an economic term. It refers to the proportional increase or decrease in the final income that occurs from a capital injection or capital withdrawal. That is, it measures the impact that a change in economic activity will have on the total economic output of something. For example, if there is an investment or spending, how it will affect the total economic output is what is calculated by the multiplier effect. Now, according to the research, the impact, the multiplier effect of ₹1 spent on capital expenditure is as high as 2.45 rupees when compared to the ₹1 spent on revenue expenditure. That is, according to the research, when the government spends ₹1 on capital expenditure, it gives back 2.65 rupees as returns. But on the other hand, if they spend the same amount on revenue expenditure, they will only get 0.99 rupees. So in this discussion, we saw what is capital expenditure. For that, we saw that government's expenditure can be divided into two. One is revenue expenditure and the other one is capital expenditure. And we saw that capital expenditure creates assets. And then we saw the advantages of capital expenditure, which are it creates assets, it leads to repayment of loans, it enhances labor participation, it generates demand, it attracts private investments, and through the multiplier effect, it sustains the economic growth. So these are the points that you have to remember from this discussion. Now let us get to the next one. Now our next discussion is also going to be an economics topic. It is based on this news article. It talks about the view of a rating agency on the fiscal deficit target set in the Union Budget 2020-23. The rating agency is Fitch Ratings. Here the agency anticipated the fiscal deficit target for 2020-23 to be 6.1% of the GDP. But as you know, Government of India in its Union Budget has set a fiscal deficit target of 6.4% of the GDP. So this is much higher than the anticipation of the rating agency, and it has expressed worries in this regard. So that is why let us revise what do you mean by fiscal deficit, and then we'll see how fiscal deficit affects the economy when it increases, particularly when there is a persistent increase. So this is the syllabus relevant to this discussion. You can take note of it. Now let us understand how a deficit occurs. See, when your spending is greater than the money you earn, a deficit occurs. So then what do we mean by a fiscal deficit? It means that there is excess of total disbursements from the Consolidated Fund of India over total receipts into the Consolidated Fund of India. Now here you should note that this total disbursements excludes the repayment of debt, and here the total receipts excludes the debt receipts during a financial year. And also note that a fiscal deficit is expressed as a percentage of GDP. See here, when we say total receipts of the government, it includes corporation tax, income tax, interest receipts, dividends and profits, etc. And on the other hand, expenditures of the government will include revenue expenditure, capital expenditure, interest payments, etc. So that is why the formula for fiscal deficit is the total expenditure minus the total receipts except the borrowings and other liabilities. Or simply it means that deficit that arises when government's expenditure exceeds its revenue, and here we have to exclude the money which is generated as revenues from the borrowings and other liabilities. We can also call this as the total expenditure minus the total receipts except the debt capital receipts, because the borrowings and other liabilities are a part of this debt capital receipts only. So what do we mean when we say there is fiscal surplus? So this means that the receipts are more than expenditure. On the other hand, it will be a fiscal deficit when the expenditure is more than the receipt. This is the simplest definition. And overall note that a fiscal deficit means the country is in debt. Now, when does this fiscal deficit occurs? See, firstly, if the government's revenue falls, then it will lead to fiscal deficit. For example, if the gross tax revenue falls, then the fiscal deficit may occur. And secondly, it will occur if the government spending increases. For example, if the government spends more in order to upbring a section of the society through schemes, then this will also lead to fiscal deficit, because this will add to the expenditure side of the equation. Now, what will happen if the fiscal deficit increases in a persistent manner? Firstly, it can lead to runaway inflation. This hurts our quality of life. See, as you know, inflation simply means rise in prices of goods and services. But this runaway inflation means there is a rapid rise in the prices of goods and services. So first of all, fiscal deficit leads to runaway inflation. And that is why it hurts the quality of life. Now, secondly, it affects a country's credit ratings. See, as you know, generally national governments are the largest capital market borrowers, and their credit standing serves as a key benchmark in the world's capital markets. For example, if you take the credit rating company called as Moody's, its rating is often taken into consideration. See, this Moody company rates the debt of over 120 sovereign nations. So this rating provides the investors a frame of reference to facilitate a broad comparability among the sovereign nations. Here, what the investors will do is they will match the sovereign credit risk with the country's risk. So what do you mean by sovereign risk? It is a chance that a national government's treasury or its central bank will default on their sovereign debt. In addition to this, the foreign exchange rules or restrictions which the country may implement will also be a part of the sovereign risk, because it will significantly reduce or negate the worth of its forex contracts. So in simple words, the investors use the ratings of these companies as a guide, and they will know which investments will not default and which will subsequently yield a solid return. So we can understand that for investors, an accurate appreciation of sovereign default risk is critical. Now, when the country's credit rating is low, that too due to high fiscal deficit, it leads to delays in investment decisions by the businesses. This in turn affects the growth of the economy, and this leads to macroeconomic instability. So in this way, a high fiscal deficit affects a nation's credit ratings, and this leads to macroeconomic instability. Now, thirdly, fiscal deficit may also lead to printing of money. Why? Because to fund the deficits, governments print money, but this could devalue the paper money. And fourthly, the persistent deficits increase government debt, because here the government's borrowings are increasing as opposed to its revenues. So here, a larger portion of government's revenues has to be spent towards interest payouts rather than spending for schemes and programs. So this in turn leaves a large burden of dues for the future generations, and that is why persistent deficits increase government debt. Therefore, a high level of debt is associated with slower growth, because huge deficits are seen largely in a negative light by the international rating agencies and economy watchers, and that is why the rating agencies and economists observe the fiscal deficit in the budget. And as I already said in the beginning, the fiscal deficit target for 2020-23 is fixed at 6.4% in the union budget. And here the government is relying on strong economic growth to help drive its fiscal consolidation. And as a part of this only, government has announced a large bump in capital expenditure. But this poses some uncertainty because of the pandemic related risks. So the credit rating agencies like Fitch and Moody's, they have expressed worries about the country's finances, and they are worrying that government's deficits would further add pressure to the economy. So these are the points that you can take note from this article discussion. In this discussion, we saw about fiscal deficit, we saw what leads to a fiscal deficit, then we saw how it affects the economy, etc. Now let's get to the next discussion. So let us take up this news article. This article reports about an important issue cited by the aluminium industry. See, the aluminium industry has sought urgent government intervention to address the situation of rapidly depleting coal stocks. Now you will be wondering why we are talking about coal stocks with respect to aluminium industry. We'll discuss it later in the discussion. Before that, we'll understand about aluminum and aluminium industry in India. See, basically aluminium is a metal, and among the metals, aluminium is the most abundant one. It is the third most abundant in Earth's crust. And this aluminium metal is light and it is best known for its qualities. For example, it is corrosion resistant, it has better heat conductivity, malleability, and it has the ability to become strong when mixed with other metals. Now, because of these properties, aluminium is used to manufacture aircrafts, utensils, and wires. Apart from this, aluminium has also acquired popularity as an alternative to steel, copper, zinc, and lead in various sectors. But here you should note that even though aluminium is one of the most abundant elements in Earth's crust, it does not occur as aluminium metal as such. Rather, it occurs in various proportions in different metals. For example, it is a major component of many igneous minerals such as mica and clays. And even many gemstones are impure forms of aluminium oxide. In addition to this, we also have a principal ore from which aluminium metal is extracted. It is the bauxite ore. See, when we say ore, it means the natural rock or sediment from which a metal is extracted. Now, this bauxite is a very bulky, dark, reddish colored rock, as you can see in this image. So, from this, aluminium metal is extracted. Now, because of its uses, aluminium industry is also important for an economy, and there are two prime factors which decide the location of an aluminium industry. The first one is such a location must have regular supply of electricity, and secondly, that location must have an assured source of raw material availability at a minimum cost. But the problem is some industries might have the availability of assured source of raw material, but they may lack supply of electricity. Now, such aluminium industries will have a captive power plant to facilitate the continued power supply. So, when you say captive power plant, it refers to a facility that provides a localized source of power to an energy user, and to generate electricity, such captive power plants, they use coal. So, that means for an aluminium industry, electricity is important, and when there is no regular supply of electricity, they need a captive power plant, and such a captive power plant needs coal stocks to generate electricity. And as I said in the beginning, the coal stocks are said to be depleting, and that is why the aluminium industry has sought urgent government intervention to address the situation. See, here the problem is that the captive power plants of the aluminium industry, they have critically low coal stocks of only 3 to 4 days, but the prescribed level is coal stocks of 15 days. So, because of this, now the industries have requested to earmark at least 25 to 30 coal rakes per day for sustainable industry operations. So, this is how the coal stocks and aluminium industry are related. Now, from exam point of view, also note that aluminium smelting plants are located in Odisha, West Bengal, Kerala, Uttar Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu in our country. Here in this map, you can see the important aluminium smelting plants, and the important one is NALCO, which is National Aluminium Company Limited. It is a Schedule A Navaratna CPSC that was established in 1981. It is situated in Odisha. So that is all about aluminium industry. In this discussion, we saw some basic facts about aluminium. Then we saw the two important factors for the location of an aluminium industry, and then we saw how coal stock is related to aluminium industry, and finally we saw where the aluminium industries are located in our country. So with this news article discussion, now we are moving to the next session, the practice questions discussion session. Now today we are going to take this previous year question first. This question was asked in 2020. The question asks, with reference to fiscal deficit, consider the following statements. First statement, it is equal to total receipts minus expenditure. Now on the face of it, this statement might look correct, but it is actually incorrect, because keep in mind that here it talks about fiscal surplus and not fiscal deficit. Because here total receipts minus total expenditure is the formula for fiscal surplus, whereas total expenditure minus total receipts except borrowings and liabilities is the formula for fiscal deficit. So the moment you know that statement 1 is incorrect, you can easily eliminate option C, because the question here asks for the incorrect statements. So stay attentive here. Now the second statement says it may lead to printing of money. This statement is correct. We saw this during discussion. So you can eliminate option B also. Now it results in high credit rating for the country. This statement is incorrect, because fiscal deficit results in low credit rating for the country, which we discussed during the analysis. So that means the correct answer to this question is option D, 1 and 3 only. Now let us take up this next question. It is a 3-statement question. When capital assets are put into service, depreciation occurs and their value decreases throughout their useful lives. Statement 2. Returns on capital expenditure are unpredictable because even loss can occur. Statement 3. The accounting process of identifying and measuring and estimating the costs relating to capital expenditures may be quite complicated. See here, the question asks us to choose the correct statements. Actually, all the statements are correct. These are the main disadvantages with the capital expenditure. If you take the first statement, here depreciation means reduction in the value of an asset over time. That is, the asset is subjected to wear and tear. So its value decreases. So even though capital expenditures have an initial increase in the asset, but once the capital assets start being put into service, depreciation begins and their value decreases. So statement 1 is correct. Now the second statement talks about unpredictability. Now governments making large investments in capital assets hope to generate predictable outcomes. However, such outcomes are not guaranteed and losses may even occur. So the costs and benefits of capital expenditure decisions are usually characterized by a lot of uncertainty. So this statement is also correct. Now the third statement talks about the measurement problems. That is, it is quite difficult to identify and measure the capital expenditures. So this statement is also correct. That is why the correct answer is option D, 1, 2 and 3. So now this is the third question, which is the practice prelims question quiz for you. This question is based on the input tax credit discussion. Try to attend this question and post your answer in the comment section. If you are unable to arrive at the correct answer, go to the discussion again and listen to it. So with this quiz question, I am taking this mains practice question. Interested aspirants can write answer to this question and post the answer in the comment section. Whenever we get time, we'll review your answer. With this, we have come to the end of today's Hindi News Analysis session. If you like this video, don't forget to like, comment and share. And also subscribe to Shankar IAS Academy YouTube channel for receiving timely updates about civil services preparation. Thank you.